Welcome to Reinventing Capitalism, a space where tech, social entrepreneurship, and impact meet to create the businesses that will lead to a sustainable future. I'm your host, Claudia Thomas. Today, I'm speaking to Alba, founder of Climatize, a company that is democratizing access to renewable energy investments. In this conversation, we first talk about the importance of behavioral change in addressing the climate crisis and how to change the climate narrative from sacrifice to opportunity. Then, Alba explains in detail how Climatize's platform works and talks about the misconceptions surrounding impact investing returns. We end the conversation talking about political changes on renewable energy policies, the importance of inspiring talent to work in impact-driven companies, and with an optimistic yet realistic look into the future of our planet. Join us to explore how Alba is transforming the way in which we access renewable energy investments so that we can potentially earn a return. Alba, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm super excited about this conversation with you, Claudia.
Let's get straight into the point. There's a lot of talk about the climate crisis and the Paris Agreement and becoming net zero by 2050, but we are truly far away from reaching these goals. Why do you think we haven't been able to change people's behaviors and act faster towards this problem?
Wow, this is a strong question to start with. Let me start maybe with a reflection, because I have the feeling that a lot of people who will be listening to us will be asking themselves this question, right? Like, how important is behavior change when it comes to achieving those goals in the first place, right? Because if we think about it, 100 companies are responsible for like over 70% of the emissions, right? So sometimes as an individual, you might be asking yourself, like, why is behavioral change important? Are my everyday actions actually going to move the needle? In my opinion, I do think that it is extremely important. I don't think that we should be putting the blame on the individual, but I do think that we should be incentivizing people to act on climate change, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who are able to signal that there is demand for change, that there is demand for sustainability. We are the ones that with our maybe limited but measurable actions can actually go and channel and drive systemic change as well. So I do think that behavioral change is extremely important. So maybe starting with that reflection first. And then how to incentivize that and how to make it happen. I do think that there's two main issues that make us, or maybe don't enable us to move as fast. And maybe one of them is that behavioral change is inherently extremely complex, right? Like, you're trying to change people's mindset, you're trying to change people's comfort and just everyday life, and that is just a big ask for many. And then there's also maybe the hard realization of some people just can't afford to care about climate. Like, sometimes you just need to prioritize other things in your life, and you can't necessarily go and act on climate. So I would say those are the main challenges that I see very front and center. And then maybe as a proposed solution that I see, and something that I am a big advocate for, is we just need to incentivize the right actions by just, again, making the sustainable option the easier option, the affordable option, the convenient option, because only that way we will be able to change people's behavior and actually achieve climate change goals. So yeah, I would say I will stop here. A lot of information.
Yeah, for sure. And the reason I ask it's because I've heard you talk about how climate change can be an opportunity, and it feels like we still see climate change from a very negative perspective, from a very negative standpoint. So how can we show people that, climate action can be an opportunity?
I actually did a TEDx talk about exactly that topic, changing the climate narrative from sacrifice to opportunity. So again, something that I feel very strongly about. I would say there are several ways to do it, and maybe an example is by providing a financial incentive. For instance, I have an impact investing platform. Maybe that serves also as an example. When you incentivize people to do something that is right, and actually enable them to make money off of it, or provide tax breaks if you invest in sustainable projects or renewable energy projects, or even at a more macro level, if you look at corporations and even the government, like here in the States, you have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is essentially like a policy that's entirely based off of carrots and incentivizing companies and corporates in general just to take climate action, and then they're able to claim tax benefits as well and other incentives and government grants. You can see that by providing these financial incentives in many cases, that is really how you actually just incentivize people to take that more sustainable path and route. And then another thing is just making it accessible and affordable, because sometimes the barrier to entry is also just information being accessible. There's a huge educational lift that needs to be made in order to really understand what is the right choice or the sustainable option. And then obviously accessibility in terms of like financially being able to pursue these alternatives. For instance, like shopping on a more sustainable manner, sometimes it's a little bit more expensive. So just trying to make it a little bit more accessible for those who maybe can't afford it as well.
And actually, you just briefly mentioned what you do, the impact investing solution that you've brought to market. You are helping people have access to investments in a more easy way. I'll let you talk about that. But before that, can you tell us a little bit who is Alba at a personal level that has fueled her professional ambition?
Claudia, this is probably the hardest question that you're going to ask me today. I'm still trying to figure out who Alba is myself, so interesting question. I would say maybe starting with the very basics. I'm a very passionate person. I'm very intuitive. I really follow my intuition and from a personal standpoint and professionally as well. And then I'm extremely hardworking. I know it kind of sounds weird if I say it myself, but I do really work hard. Like I do really put in the hours, and I do really always try my best. And I do really think that that has helped me achieve many things that initially I thought were maybe impossible or unimaginable. What else? I would say I'm very motivated by the concept of more with less. This is actually one of our company values, even just because I feel very strongly about it as well. And that means that I want to always achieve the best results or pursue a life where I can achieve more with less resources, and that obviously ties in very well with the sustainability concept. I'm very simple. I would say I really enjoy the very simple things in life. Like I love running. This morning I went running during the sunrise, and it was beautiful. I love also running with sunsets. That's kind of like my prime time to go and do it. I love eating my favorite food, going to my grandparents and seeing that they cooked my favorite dish and
Love
so on. Like
that.
that's really what makes me happy. Again, extremely simple. And maybe what fuels my professional ambition, I would say it's first of all a deep love for nature and for our planet. And I feel very responsible to do something about the climate crisis. So I would say that is my main driver. And then a second driver, which is maybe more selfish, is I love challenges. I love hard stuff. And I'm very competitive, not with necessarily people around me, but like with
With
myself.
yourself.
Exactly. And I would want to prove that I can go and achieve things that are hard, right? So I would say the challenge is something that I feel very attracted to. But well, yeah, this is a very short summary.
Love it, love it. And you've actually taken on a huge challenge, which is founding Climatize. I would love to understand when did you realize that the world needed Climatize?
Wow. Okay. I think probably 2019. I mean, that is when we came up with the idea initially. And if you want, I can share with you the founding story. So back in 2019, I believe it was September, we just started our master's program. So my co-founder Will and I were at that time doing a double master's in renewable energy engineering. And we decided to go to a climate strike. At that time, it was the global climate strikes in Barcelona. And while we were there, we saw this sea of 100,000 people protesting for climate action. that it gave us hope, it gave us motivation. But at the same time, we kind of landed on this very sad realization that the next day we would all go home, nothing would be different. We made a bunch of cardboard signs, but that wasn't really going to move the needle. So that's really when we started to think about there's this collective will to make a difference, but people don't feel like they are empowered enough to actually do something about climate change. So we carried a lot of interviews, and in the end, we decided to start a platform that would enable people to invest in renewable energy projects. And why renewable energy projects and why investing? It's because at the same time, through our lived experiences, my co-founder was actually working at as a solar installer to pay his way through college. I was working as an energy consultant before this, and we both knew that there was this gap when it comes to financing renewable energy projects that are under $10 million. So we kind of connected two problems. One of them, like very vivid, the day of the climate strike, and the other one just really doing research and thinking about, like, through our lived experiences, which problems have we encountered in the renewable energy space. So we connected both, we ran with it, we started a university project that was about Climatize, then we took it on full time after graduating. So it happened very naturally, I would say.
It's so cool that it started as a university project and now it has become your life project.
Yes.
Describe a little bit more, what is it and like how does it work?
So it's pretty simple, actually. So it's a platform. As an investor, you can enter the website or download the app, whatever you prefer, and you have a list of projects. The minimum investment is $10. We are US based, so that's why I'm using dollars all the time. And you can select the project of your choice. You can get informed, understand how the investment works, what the project is all about. You start investing with again $10, and then you can potentially earn a return. So that's how it works for the investor. And for the project developer, if you have a project that you're looking to raise capital for, it is always renewable energy or climate related projects. So we have a lot of solar, EV charging infrastructure, energy efficiency. So all projects along those lines. We have some battery storage as well. If you're the developer, you can reach out to us. We go through a diligence process with you, and you can raise capital for your project through regulation crowdfunding. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we do. Pretty straightforward.
And how do you source the projects?
I'm actually the one doing that. So
Okay.
given you asked, yeah, I'm all things projects. That's me. So there's, I would say, three main ways. Probably the most I would say successful one or most direct channel is us reaching out to companies that we like, that we've identified are doing something cool that would be a fit. So a lot of outbound, especially during the very early stages of the company. Now we start having a lot of inbound. So a lot of people going to our website. We have a form for those of you who are looking for funding, and you can complete the form, and then we have a call and see if the project is a fit. And then through a lot of referrals as well. So once we work with a client and they're happy with the results, they have been recommending us to some of their colleagues. So a lot of people just are coming through word of mouth. So I would say those are the three main ways.
And once you find them, what's the due diligence to make sure that it's a project that can have returns to your investors?
So for the diligence process, the first thing that I want to mention is that we take this super seriously. Like, we take every single dollar that is invested with a lot of respect, and we treat it with a lot of care, as if it was our own money. Like, I actually feel like it is my own money that is invested. So I always put in a lot of work when it comes to diligence. Maybe some things that I should highlight. So we do a lot of diligence on who the developer actually is. So we do background checks on the owners of the company. We do reviewed or audited financial statements depending on the size of the raise. We ask for a lot of project related documentation, like offtake agreements and so on. So when it comes to project-related documentation, it changes a little bit depending on the size of the project, the stage of the project, and obviously the technology. But I would say, yeah, there's a part of the diligence process that's really focused on the entity itself. Then there's another one that's more about the financials and the safety measures in place, like for example, asking for reserve accounts and debt service coverage ratios of a certain number. And then we also do some technical tests and technical assessments as well when it comes to the project. So that it's threefold, I would say. But yeah, I mean, maybe to close the diligence comment, I mean, obviously with any investment, like you could lose your money. So I always want to encourage people to do their own research and not to take anything that I say as investment advice. So yeah, just want to make sure I highlight that as well. But and all of the result of the diligence process is actually available on our website and in the app. So if you go to a project, you can actually download a document that is called Form C, which covers everything that I said in depth in the event that you want to be able to look into those documents as well.
Something that I find very interesting is that I would say the general public still believes that impact investing yields lower returns. How would you counter argue that? Do you think that's true, or there's just a misconception amongst the public?
I would say it's a general misconception, and I maybe can start with like tangible examples. Like our return rates right now range between 6.5% and 10%. So again, it's a fixed interest rate per project, so it really depends on the project size, project phase, and so on. But those 10% returns for 2-year term projects exist
How
and are
long?
available. 2-year term.
Okay.
It ranges. So we have the majority of the 10% projects that we had were 2-year term. 6.5% now that we have is a 5-year term. We've had some 8% projects that are 5. Actually, some 10% projects that were 5. So again, it ranges. It depends on the project, right? So there's different options available. But just for you to have like a benchmark of where the returns lie. And if you compare that to the S&P 500, I would say since its inception, the annualized rate of return is roughly 10%, right? So it is kind of on par. And then if you compare it to obviously like very low risk government bonds here in the US, they're like approximately like 4.5%. They can go from the low 4% to like nearly 5% right now. So I would say we're kind of on par. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's yielding lower returns. And I actually think like moving forward and in the future, it is going to be not a choice, but like an obligation to invest in companies or projects that do take into consideration what the impact of their operations is going to be on the planet. So for instance, this is where ESG comes in as well, right? It can be debatable whether or not ESG is proof that things are being done correctly, but I do think it is at least a step in the right direction. So investing with taking into consideration the social and climate implications of your work is just going to be a need, not a want anymore. Just because, again, you're also mitigating a lot of risks that inherently come from not doing things the right way.
Absolutely. No, and that's like the famous triple bottom line, where it's not only about making profit, but rather adding these other variables that we need to take into account in order to analyze an investment.
Exactly.
How many members are currently using the app?
Yeah, 1,400 roughly, a little over that.
Wow.
At least
Okay.
I checked.
And how are you expecting to grow that in the next couple of months, years?
I would say we focus more on dollars raised than the number of investors.
Okay.
So dollars raised through the platform is really our North Star metric, just because that's how we measure impact, right? So like every dollar that is going into a renewable energy project directly translates into impact. I would say that's where we have the goal. And if we can get more people, better. That's really our main focus right now. Connecting to your question, we're roughly at a little over $6 million invested in the last year and a half or so. Our goal for the end of the year is 10. So we have a lot to do in a month that is left of the year.
Everything is
Yeah,
possible. So
I'm telling you, like we're pushing hard. So
you said a word that I love, which is impact. How are you measuring your impact?
Sure. So the majority of our impact is based off of the projects that are supported by our investors. Right now, we're roughly at 25,000 tons of CO2 emissions avoided throughout the lifetime of these projects that we have supported. Sometimes it's hard to like directly or like very precisely measure what the impact of a project is going to be, because for instance there's a project where we are investing in a portfolio of different projects, so it's a pretty diversified investment in nature, and until the money hasn't been fully deployed we won't have the exact data
Figures, yeah.
of how exactly of how that investment correlated or directly is related with CO2 emissions avoided. So right now it is an estimate, but yeah, that's the main way that we measure impact through our projects. And obviously, as a company, we do our best to also offset our emissions. First of all, minimize our emissions. I mean, we're a digital company. We're working remotely, so we also try to do our best as a small startup.
So something that truly caught my attention when I was researching for this podcast is that the price per kilowatt has decreased by more than 60% in the last 10 years, if I'm not wrong. Why is it not more democratized then? Like, why are not more people using renewable energy?
When you say using, maybe, do you mean like pursuing going solar or
Exactly.
energy efficiency measures? I would say there's a lack of education. Like sometimes you just don't have access to that information. There's an upfront investment that is required. I work with a lot of farms here in the States, and many of them just don't have the upfront capital that is required to actually go solar, for instance. There's also historically been a lot of companies that have gone to specific collectives, like, for example, farmers, and have promised them free solar, which is almost impossible, right? You can't just do it for free entirely. So they've been burnt in the past many times. And now there's a feeling of, there's a general lack of trust to really go and pursue this, because in the past they've had very negative experiences. So I would say all of those combined do really act as a big barrier or blocker to progress. What I've really seen is that through enabling them to pursue solar without that upfront investment, they've actually been pretty interested in that. Then there's also a lot of incentives that they can apply to that we've supported these collectives identify. So this way, part of the initial investment or part of the total project cost can be actually reduced by claiming these incentives. For instance, there's a grant here in the States under the Department of Agriculture that covers 50% of the total project cost after the project has shown 1 month of power production data. So that's an option for many, and it's literally 50% of the total project cost. So I would say there's things like these that do help a lot. But yeah, that upfront investment is pretty daunting to many. So that's why we're here.
And from a retail perspective, so like from a customer like me or you perspective, do we have less access because there's just not supply of this renewable or solar energy?
So as a retail investor, you mean us going solar or us investing in these types of opportunities?
So us having solar, for example, I don't know, at home, like instead of having electricity powered by fossil fuels.
I would say it's kind of connected to the same. We don't act or we don't work with the residential space, but I do know that there's a lot of opportunities out there to actually have or obtain financing with pretty straightforward terms. And it's again same thing, you know, like maybe lack of, I don't want to say lack of education, but maybe lack of knowledge of not really understanding like all the implications of this. Maybe it's also a lack of time. Like actually personally with my family, we're going solar back in Barcelona. The main barrier to this has actually been a lack of time, like of just not really prioritizing it enough, right? So yeah, lack of time, lack of knowledge, maybe also the barrier of the initial investment that is required and not necessarily finding a financier or a developer that you feel truly comfortable with. So I would say it has been a combination of these. And then maybe the obvious one is many people also live in cities. So if you just don't own a roof where you can actually put on some panels, it can also be a challenge, right? So that is why there's co-ops out there, there's the community solar projects as well, which is, in my opinion, an amazing avenue and solution. So all of these things are also available.
So it seems like there's still a huge gap between what's happening in the industry and the information that gets to consumers. And I want to address a big elephant in the room, which is Trump. All the news that I've read, it's about Trump denying the climate crisis or not wanting to do anything about it. How does that affect Climatize or changing consumers' behaviors as we've been discussing?
And yes, a huge elephant in the room. I would say these last weeks have been crazy. I'm actually currently in the States. I flew in here right after we found out about the results. I knew this could happen. I was probably in denial. So I was still surprised by it, to be honest. Maybe looking at the industry as a whole, and then I can also talk about how it will affect Climatize. Industry as a whole, I do think that obviously there's huge implications of the change in administration. The first one being the US maybe not being part of the Paris Agreement any longer. Then there's also the Inflation Reduction Act, and maybe for those of you who might not be aware of this, it's the most important climate policy that has ever passed in US history. And there's $700 billion that are just going to climate solutions, climate resiliency. So it is a big deal. And the change in an administration, even though the Inflation Reduction Act has been built with a potential change in administration in mind, it is obviously under threat, right? So there's some things that the new administration could do. So for instance, it could entirely repeal the IRA. I do not think that would happen, but obviously they're going to try their best to slow down the progress that is being done in climate. So for instance, here in the States, there's a lot of tax incentives. There's something that's called the investment tax credits, which essentially 30% and up to 70% of a renewable energy project can be tax deductible. And now there's a new clause that came with the IRA as well, which is called transferability, which enables you to sell those credits if you don't have enough tax liability. So with this, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not the ITCs will remain, whether or not transferability will remain. Then there's a lot of federal incentives for EV charging infrastructure that are under threat. Obviously, offshore wind is a clear no-go. So again, there's a lot of things that are under potential threat. But yeah, we need to still pushing, right? Like in the end, the climate crisis is here. We need to do something about it. And no matter who is the president, we at an individual level, we need to try our best to just continue pushing. So a little disappointed, to be honest, with what happened, right? But trying to find ways to continue doing what we do. And honestly, I think that now it's more important than ever that we continue to try our best to push projects, to raise awareness, educate people about what's happening and why.
For sure. And it's more important than ever because it's probably going to be more difficult than ever because we need to counter argue the news that come from someone that is very, very high up. So I'm sure that must not be easy.
Exactly. And also, I would say every cloud has its silver lining as well. Maybe, there's some learnings, or maybe there's some benefits that we can get from a change in administration. So for instance, maybe optimizing and increasing the efficiency of the government and making things a little bit more deregulated and enabling companies and startups and investors to move quicker without so much bureaucracy. I
Yeah.
do think that maybe we can see some efficiency gains there. So again, I'm sure that not everything is bad, but I do think that it is very important to just understand how everything is going to play out. I would say the biggest word that for me defines the change in administration is uncertainty. Like not really knowing what is going to happen is really disruptive for companies and businesses, and I do think that's probably the biggest threat in the end, just not really understanding what will happen, because it really caps your ability to actually go and plan ahead, right? So once we're past this uncertainty phase and we see how things play out beginning of next year, I think that we will be in a better position to respond to this.
Alba, you've been given many, many awards. I saw an endless list of awards. One, for example, is the acclaimed Forbes 30 Under 30. How does that make you feel when you receive it, and how does that change you or your opportunities?
It's very rewarding. We've been working very hard as a team, and every time we see our work recognized, it feels great. We feel very honored, very proud. And again, like this, maybe the Forbes 30 Under 31 feels like a very, I wouldn't call it individual award, but my co-founder Will and I did receive it, but in the end we received it on behalf of our entire team, who has been putting in the work and really ensuring that's we are making an impact. And yeah, thankful for the opportunity to receive these awards. But in the end, the most important thing, is just getting the work done. And I would say my happiest moments have always been talking to a project owner and knowing how satisfied they are with their solar panels, and maybe talking to an investor who sends out a nice note saying that they're very excited about being a part of this. So I would say, like, the awards are definitely important, but my biggest reward is always hearing back from the people that we are actively supporting, that they are enjoying the process as well.
What is something that has happened in your journey as a founder that you would have never imagined?
So many. Honestly, like, there's always every day is different. Things change so quickly. Like, I feel like in these last roughly 3 years that we've been at it, so many things have happened. Maybe picking like a very recent example, I went to Beijing, which, I never thought I would go to China anytime soon, but we were invited to speak at a conference for the 20th anniversary of the term ESG, really focused on like China and US relationship. So I do think it was a very, very important, it was a very interesting learning process. And yeah, maybe that, again, it was crazy, like, it was so cool, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned so much, and really came out of that thinking about how important collaboration is, especially now with the change of administration, and knowing how maybe the relationship between the US and China is not there's a lot of challenges. So I would say it was very enriching to go and learn from people actually living there and working in the energy space, what the feeling was, right?
It reminds me of that feeling when something happens like serendipitously, and suddenly you are wondering, what am I doing here?
Exactly. Yes,
like that you have no idea how you got there, but how come you have? And it's one of those moments where it brings a lot of joy also.
Definitely. Yeah. And right after that as well, I went to Paris for the Olympics, and I also participated at a panel about climate action and sustainability. So I mean, these things are just things that you don't necessarily plan for. Like, I never plan for these things, but these opportunities just come.
Yeah.
So that's why I would say these are the most unexpected ones. Sometimes you get these surprises, which are pretty interesting, and they're pretty fun. So yeah.
Love that. I hope all these surprises keep happening to you.
Yes, there's a lot of surprises.
I would say the main objective of this podcast is to inspire talent to work for companies in the world of impact, companies that are addressing one of the 17 UN SDGs. What can we, and with we I say the impact community, do to inspire talent to work for these kind of companies?
That's a great question. And maybe I can start with saying that I do think that it is important to work for impact companies, but you can actually start making an impact today at your current job. Because I've met a lot of people who maybe are working for a company that is not an impact company per se, but they still have this motivation to do something about climate. Or when I say impact, it could also mean social impact as well, which is extremely important too. So I would say we need to encourage people to start making an impact today, and to make them see that they can actually do it from their current role. It's not easy, but I do think that you need to start by identifying which areas can be improved, and then to just the lead as an example and start asking questions and start proposing initiatives and see if there's any way to change business as usual and start making an impact from within. If that is not an option for you, yes, you probably need to pursue a career change. So, and then you can go and pursue maybe working with an impact company directly. And then maybe what can impact companies do to attract more talent to their organizations? I would say probably the biggest challenge is this misconception about impact means that you need to sacrifice financial stability, that you need to go and pursue maybe an underpaid role or job. Obviously, that is scary for many, and sometimes, again, not a lot of people can go and do that because you have responsibilities, you might have a family, you have financial needs. So I would say we really need to fight that and show that working in impact doesn't mean or doesn't come at the expense of financial stability.
The reality is that it's not true, right? And that was exactly my next question. Like, which are these misconceptions? And one, it's this financial security. So the more that we can voice that and share, explain that that's not really the case, and there are so many impact companies that are growing and are financially successful, that's for sure going to be a game changer. Because at the end of the day, we can be very impact driven, but everyone cares about the dollar value attached to their paychecks.
Exactly. And again, like, if we want the best talent, we need to be able to compensate them appropriately. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's just the nature of how things work. So
I agree. I agree. Thank you, Alba. I have one last question for you. I'm building this tradition in this podcast where I love to ask about the future of the industry. So I want you to imagine you're looking into a crystal ball that shows you the future. How do you predict the world will have addressed the climate crisis in the next 5 to 10 years?
oof.
There you go. Last question.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, and I want to think that we're capable of addressing the climate crisis in a timely manner. But I also have to say that it doesn't help if we don't look at the data and we're not, being very objective about it. I'm a little pessimistic in this case, where I do really follow everything that comes out of the IPCC reports, and I hate to say it, but I do really think that we will for sure have surpassed the 1.5 degree mark by, I would say, the early 2030s. So that obviously comes with a ton of challenges. This is going to increase the extreme weather events, and I mean, we've all
seen them already.
No, we've seen them. They are close to home in many occasions. For example, the deadly floods in Valencia, that was extremely heartbreaking for me. I do have family in the area, and I was really following very closely what was happening. And events like these will, or are actually already twice as likely. The heavy rainfall increased by like 12% just because of already the increase in temperature. So I don't want to have to wait and live more events like these ones to make people actually go and take the action that is required. So I hope that this is like a food for thought for many. Let's just not wait until the next disaster happens to actually think about what we could do about the climate crisis. Let's just act now, because at the end of the day, we're going to be saving lives. We're going to be making people's lives better in general by just acting now and avoiding irreversible damage to our planet, right? So again, a little pessimistic, unfortunately, because I am a data-driven person and that's what I must follow, but still, it doesn't mean that I'm not fighting for a different outcome. And I do encourage everyone who's listening today to try and join me to fight for a different outcome, because that's really not what we want. I would say that's my my forecast or prediction.
Not as optimistic as I normally hear you speak.
It's not really my nature, but sometimes, like feet on the ground.
And I guess more realistic, no? Like, we can be very optimistic,
Exactly.
but we cannot unsee the reality and the hard numbers. So I just hope that after this conversation, people can just be a tiny little bit more aware, and hopefully little by little we can change consumer behaviors.
I hope so too, Claudia.
Thank you, Alba.
Thank you so much. It's been a very nice chat, a pleasure to talk to you today, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Bye-bye.
Bye.